Sarah had always been the kind of woman who lit up a room with her warmth. Her smile could melt even the coldest hearts, and her laugh was contagious. For over a decade, she shared her life with Richard, a man she believed would stand by her through thick and thin. They met in college, fell deeply in love, and built what they thought was an unbreakable bond. Their home was filled with laughter, dreams, and plans for the future. But life has a way of testing people, and Sarah's test came unexpectedly. One rainy evening, while driving back from a friend's house, Sarah's car skidded off the road. The accident left her paralyzed from the waist down. What followed were months of surgeries, physical therapy, and endless tears. Through it all, Richard stayed by her side, at least at first. In the beginning, he seemed supportive, holding her hand during doctor visits and helping her adjust to her new reality. But as time went on, his patience began to wear thin. He stopped joining her for therapy sessions, claiming work kept him busy. His once loving gaze turned distant, and their conversations dwindled to awkward silences. Sarah noticed the change but tried to hold on to hope. She convinced herself that Richard just needed time to process everything. After all, her accident hadn't only changed her life, it had shaken his too. But soon, whispers reached her ears. Friends hinted that Richard was spending more time with a younger woman named Vanessa. At first, Sarah dismissed the rumors, refusing to believe her husband could betray her. But little things started adding up. Late-night phone calls he hurriedly ended when she entered the room, expensive gifts he couldn't explain, and weekends away under the guise of business trips. It wasn't until she saw them together that the truth hit her like a freight train. One afternoon, while running errands near Richard's office, Sarah spotted him walking out of a cafe with Vanessa. The young woman clung to his arm, laughing at something he said. Sarah felt her heart shatter into a million pieces, but she didn't confront him. Not then. Instead, she returned home, sat alone in silence, and cried until there were no tears left. Divorce papers arrived weeks later, delivered coldly and without explanation. Richard barely looked her in the eye as he explained his decision. "I can't do this anymore," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "You deserve someone better." The words stung not because they were untrue, but because they came from a man who had vowed to love her forever. Sarah signed the papers quietly, vowing to move forward despite the pain. As the date of the final hearing approached, Sarah prepared herself for closure. She knew Richard planned to marry Vanessa immediately after the divorce was finalized, a slap in the face she never expected. Yet, instead of crumbling, something shifted inside her. She began piecing together clues about Vanessa, determined to uncover the truth. Little did Richard know, his decision to wed so hastily would lead to his downfall, and Sarah would be the one smiling through it all. The day of the divorce hearing arrived, and Sarah dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that made her feel strong despite the storm brewing inside her. She wanted to appear calm, even though her heart was heavy with years of memories now reduced to legal papers. The courthouse was crowded, as if everyone had gathered to witness the end of what was once a beautiful love story. Reporters lingered outside, eager for gossip about Richard's scandalous new relationship. Sarah ignored them all, focusing instead on putting one foot in front of the other, literally and figuratively. Richard showed up late, strutting into the courtroom like he owned the place. His usual confident demeanor seemed exaggerated today, almost desperate. On his arm was Vanessa, a striking woman who looked like she belonged in a magazine rather than a courthouse. Her glossy hair cascaded over her shoulders, and her designer dress hugged her figure perfectly. She carried herself with an air of superiority, glancing around the room as though judging everyone present. When their eyes met briefly, Vanessa gave Sarah a smug smile, clearly relishing the moment. Sarah returned the look with a quiet, knowing gaze that hinted at secrets yet to be revealed. The judge called the proceedings to order, and the room fell silent. As the formalities began, Sarah couldn't help but notice how Richard fidgeted nervously, avoiding eye contact with her. It was strange. He had been so adamant about ending their marriage, yet now he seemed uneasy. Vanessa, on the other hand, leaned forward eagerly, whispering something into Richard's ear. Whatever she said made him straighten up, and he nodded sharply before addressing the judge. "Your Honor," he began, his voice loud enough to fill the room, "we'd like to finalize this matter quickly. My fiancé and I are eager to start our new life together." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Startled glances were exchanged between attendees, some shaking their heads in disbelief. Even the judge raised an eyebrow, but continued with the process. Within minutes, the gavel struck, officially dissolving Sarah and Richard's marriage. The sound echoed in the room like a gunshot, marking the irreversible end of their union. But Richard wasn't done yet. Before anyone could leave, he stood up dramatically, pulling Vanessa close to him. "Since we're here anyway," he announced, flashing a grin meant to charm, "Vanessa and I would like to get married right now. Let's make this day unforgettable." Gasps filled the courtroom. Some people cringed at the audacity of it all, while others whispered behind cupped hands. A few glanced sympathetically at Sarah, expecting her to break down or lash out. But Sarah didn't react the way they anticipated. Instead, she sat calmly, her lips curving into a faint smile. There was something unsettling about her expression, a mix of amusement and certainty, as though she knew something no one else did. The judge hesitated for a moment, then shrugged, declaring that since they were already in the courthouse, there was no reason not to proceed. As Richard slipped a ring onto Vanessa's finger, Sarah watched intently, her mind racing. She noticed how Vanessa's hands trembled slightly when she accepted the ring, betraying nerves beneath her polished exterior. She observed how Richard's forced laughter sounded hollow, like a man trying too hard to convince himself everything was fine. And she remembered the documents hidden safely in her bag, the ones detailing Vanessa's sordid past. While everyone else marveled at the spectacle unfolding before them, Sarah remained unfazed. She knew this wedding wasn't the beginning of a fairy tale. It was the start of Richard's downfall. As the newlyweds kissed awkwardly under the fluorescent lights of the courtroom, Sarah smiled again, this time more confidently. Karma, she thought, always has a way of balancing the scales, and soon enough, Richard would learn that lesson the hard way. After the whirlwind of the courthouse wedding, Sarah returned home, her mind sharp and focused despite the emotional turmoil swirling inside her. She wasn't one to wallow in self-pity or let bitterness consume her. Instead, she channeled her energy into uncovering the truth about Vanessa. Something about the woman had always felt off. Her overly rehearsed charm, her vague answers whenever pressed about her past, and the way she seemed more interested in Richard's bank account than in him as a person. Sarah knew instinctively that there was more to Vanessa than met the eye. Her first step was simple curiosity. Sarah began scrolling through Vanessa's social media profiles late at night, piecing together fragments of information. At first glance, Vanessa appeared to be the picture of perfection. Glamorous photos from exotic vacations, captions filled with inspirational quotes, and pictures of expensive gifts she claimed were tokens of love. But as Sarah dug deeper, inconsistencies started to emerge. Some posts were geotagged in locations Vanessa swore she'd never been to. Other times, her age didn't add up based on old profile pictures she hadn't deleted. It was subtle, but enough to raise red flags. Determined to get answers, Sarah hired a private investigator, a decision she kept to herself. The investigator, a seasoned professional named Mark, assured her he'd leave no stone unturned. Over the next few weeks, Mark uncovered a web of lies so intricate it almost seemed unbelievable. Vanessa wasn't just another gold digger. She was a seasoned con artist who specialized in targeting wealthy men on the brink of major life changes, like divorce. Her modus operandi was chillingly effective. Gain their trust, convince them she was the one, and then drain their finances before disappearing without a trace. Mark provided Sarah with documents, screenshots, and even police reports linking Vanessa to similar scams across multiple states. One case stood out: a man named Greg, who lost nearly $500,000 after marrying Vanessa under eerily similar circumstances. When confronted by authorities, Vanessa had vanished overnight, leaving Greg humiliated and financially ruined. The evidence was overwhelming, painting a clear picture of who Vanessa truly was beneath her polished exterior. Armed with this knowledge, Sarah faced a choice. She could expose Vanessa immediately, ruining the wedding and humiliating Richard in front of everyone. Or she could sit back and let events unfold naturally, knowing full well that karma would eventually catch up to both of them. After much thought, Sarah chose the latter. There was something poetic about letting Richard walk straight into Vanessa's trap, blissfully unaware of the chaos awaiting him. Besides, Sarah reasoned, exposing Vanessa now might make her look petty or vindictive. Letting things play out would ensure that justice came not from Sarah's hands, but from Vanessa's own greed and deceit. As the days passed, Sarah prepared for the next phase of her plan. She carefully planted seeds of doubt among mutual friends and acquaintances, casually mentioning odd details about Vanessa's background during conversations. "Did you know she used to live in Canada? Funny, I heard she grew up in Australia," she remarked to one friend over coffee. To another, she said, "I wonder why she doesn't talk much about her family. Have you ever met them?" Each comment was subtle, designed to plant questions in people's minds without directly accusing Vanessa of anything. Sarah also reached out to a few key individuals who might recognize Vanessa from her past schemes. She sent anonymous tips to journalists and shared bits of evidence with trusted contacts, ensuring that word would spread quietly but effectively. By the time the wedding reception rolled around, whispers about Vanessa's true identity were already circulating among guests. Yet none of this seemed to faze Richard, who remained oblivious to the storm brewing around him. Through it all, Sarah maintained her composure, wearing a serene smile that masked her inner resolve. She knew the truth would come to light sooner or later, and when it did, Richard would finally understand the consequences of his reckless decisions. For now, she was content to watch and wait, confident that justice would find its way. The wedding reception was nothing short of extravagant, a display of excess that screamed Richard's need to prove himself. He had rented out one of the most luxurious venues in town, complete with crystal chandeliers, towering floral arrangements, and a live band playing soft jazz. Waiters circulated with trays of champagne flutes, while guests mingled beneath twinkling fairy lights strung across the ceiling. It should have been a joyous occasion, but an undercurrent of awkwardness lingered in the air. Many attendees whispered behind their hands, unsure whether they were celebrating love or witnessing a spectacle. Sarah arrived fashionably late, dressed elegantly in a deep emerald gown that complemented her wheelchair perfectly. Her presence turned heads, not because she looked out of place, but because of the quiet confidence she exuded. While others might have crumbled under the weight of betrayal, Sarah radiated poise. She greeted familiar faces warmly, making small talk as if she were simply another guest at someone else's wedding. People couldn't help but admire her grace, even as they pitied her situation. Vanessa, on the other hand, was the center of attention, or so she thought. Dressed in a form-fitting red dress that demanded eyes on her, she floated through the room like a queen surveying her kingdom. Every laugh was exaggerated, every smile calculated to charm. Yet there was something brittle about her demeanor, as though she feared losing control of the narrative. She clung to Richard tightly, laughing too loudly at his jokes and leaning into him possessively whenever another woman approached. Richard, for his part, seemed determined to play the role of the happiest man alive. He raised a toast midway through the evening, praising Vanessa as the love of his life and thanking everyone for being part of their special day. His words dripped with sincerity, though his glassy eyes hinted at how much champagne he'd already consumed. Some guests clapped politely. Others exchanged skeptical glances. Sarah, seated near the back of the room, watched silently, her lips curving into a knowing smile. Throughout the evening, Sarah worked subtly to fan the flames of doubt she'd already ignited. During lulls in conversation, she casually mentioned oddities about Vanessa's background. To one group of friends, she remarked, "Isn't it funny how accents can change depending on where you've lived? I could swear Vanessa sounded British when we first met. Another time, she asked innocently, does anyone know where Vanessa went to college? I don't think I'd ever heard her mention it. Each comment was delivered lightly, almost as an afterthought, but it planted seeds of curiosity among listeners. As the hours passed, subtle cracks began to show in Vanessa's polished facade. One guest, a distant acquaintance of Richard's, pulled him aside, mentioning that Vanessa bore a striking resemblance to a woman featured in a news article years ago about a high-profile fraud case. Richard brushed it off, dismissing the claim as nonsense, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Another guest noted inconsistencies in Vanessa's stories, pointing out that she claimed to be from Melbourne, yet once mentioned growing up in Vancouver during a casual chat. Meanwhile, Vanessa grew increasingly uneasy. She noticed people exchanging curious glances and whispering when she walked by. At one point, she excused herself to the restroom, clutching her phone tightly as though searching for reassurance. When she returned, her usual bravado seemed slightly frayed around the edges. Still, Richard remained oblivious, too caught up in his own fantasy to notice the tension building in the room. Sarah, however, noticed everything. From her vantage point near the dessert table, she observed Vanessa's growing discomfort with satisfaction. The whispers were spreading faster than she'd anticipated, and she knew it was only a matter of time before the cracks widened into fractures. As the band struck up another song and couples took to the dance floor, Sarah sipped her drink slowly, her expression calm but triumphant. Karma, she thought, was well on its way. And soon, the truth would come crashing down on Richard and Vanessa like a tidal wave. As the night wore on, the cracks in Vanessa's carefully constructed facade began to widen. What started as subtle whispers among guests soon grew into hushed but pointed conversations. People who had initially been charmed by her beauty and charisma now found themselves questioning her every move. Sarah, seated quietly at a corner table, watched it all unfold with quiet satisfaction. She didn't need to do much. Her earlier comments had set the dominoes in motion, and now they were falling one by one. It was during dessert that things took a noticeable turn. A middle-aged woman named Claire, a distant relative of Richard's, approached Vanessa with what seemed like innocent curiosity. "You know," Claire said sweetly, "you remind me so much of someone I read about in the news years ago. Same hair, same laugh. It's uncanny." Vanessa froze for just a fraction of a second before forcing a brittle smile. "Oh, really?" she replied, her voice tinged with forced nonchalance. "I guess great minds think alike." But Claire wasn't done. "The woman I'm thinking of was involved in some kind of scandal, something about pretending to be someone she wasn't. Do you remember hearing about that?" Vanessa's grip on her champagne flute tightened, her knuckles turning white. She laughed nervously, brushing off the comment as a coincidence, but her eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape route. Richard, oblivious as ever, leaned over and kissed her cheek, saying loudly, "Don't worry, darling. Nobody could mistake you for anyone else. You're one of a kind." His words were meant to reassure her, but instead, they drew more attention to the exchange. Others began chiming in, their questions growing bolder. One man mentioned recognizing Vanessa from a social media profile under a different name. Another recalled seeing a photo of her online tagged in a location she claimed never to have visited. Each remark chipped away at her confidence, exposing the shaky foundation of her lies. Vanessa tried to deflect, laughing off the accusations or dismissing them as misunderstandings, but her unease became impossible to hide. Richard, finally sensing something was amiss, pulled Vanessa aside. "What's going on?" he demanded, his tone sharp. "Why are people asking all these weird questions?" Vanessa stammered, trying to explain it away as jealousy or idle gossip, but Richard's expression hardened when he noticed her trembling hands and evasive answers. For the first time, doubt flickered in his eyes. He had poured everything, his money, his reputation, his future, into this woman. The idea that she might not be who she claimed to be was unthinkable, Yet the evidence was piling up faster than he could ignore. Sarah, meanwhile, remained the picture of calm. She caught snippets of the murmured exchanges around her, noting how quickly the tide had turned against Vanessa. Several guests had even excused themselves early, clearly uncomfortable with the unfolding drama. As the evening dragged on, Vanessa's attempts to regain control grew increasingly desperate. She clung to Richard as though afraid he might slip away, but her desperation only made her appear guiltier. By the time the band announced the final song of the night, the atmosphere in the room had shifted entirely. What had begun as a celebration now felt like a trial, with Vanessa standing accused in the court of public opinion. Even Richard, drunk on champagne and denial, couldn't ignore the weight of suspicion hanging over his new bride. As the last notes of music faded, Vanessa retreated to the bar, ordering another drink with shaking hands. Her mask of confidence was slipping, revealing the panic beneath. Sarah, observing it all from afar, allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. She knew the endgame was near. Vanessa's house of cards was teetering, and it wouldn't take much to bring it crashing down. Karma, Sarah thought, always has impeccable timing. And tonight, it was working overtime. The tension in the room reached its breaking point just as the final guests were preparing to leave. The band had packed up their instruments, waiters were clearing away half-eaten desserts, and the once lively atmosphere had grown heavy with unease. That's when two detectives entered the venue, their presence immediately drawing curious stares. Dressed in plain clothes, but carrying badges visible enough to command attention, they approached Vanessa with calm authority. "Ms. Vanessa Carter," one of them asked, his tone polite but firm. Vanessa froze, her champagne flute halfway to her lips. For a moment, she looked like a deer caught in headlights, her carefully curated composure shattering before everyone's eyes. "Yes," she replied hesitantly, her voice barely above a whisper. The detective nodded and gestured for her to step aside. "We'd like to speak with you privately, if you don't mind." Panic flashed across her face as she glanced at Richard, who stood nearby, looking utterly bewildered. "What's this about?" Richard demanded, stepping forward protectively. One of the detectives held up a hand. "It's best we discuss this away from the crowd, sir," he said diplomatically. But Vanessa, realizing she couldn't avoid the inevitable, tried to play it cool. "I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding," she said with forced cheerfulness, though her hands trembled as she set down her glass. She followed the detectives to a quiet corner of the room, leaving behind a trail of whispered speculation. Sarah watched silently, her expression unreadable. She knew exactly what was coming next. The private investigator she'd hired had not only gathered evidence, but also forwarded it to the authorities, ensuring Vanessa's past crimes wouldn't go unpunished. Within minutes, the murmurs turned into outright shock as Vanessa's voice rose in protest. "This is ridiculous. You have no proof," she snapped, her polished accent slipping slightly under pressure. The detectives remained calm, showing her photos, documents, and even screenshots linking her to previous scams. Each piece of evidence struck like a hammer blow, dismantling her lies brick by brick. When Vanessa broke down, confessing everything in a tearful, disjointed rant, the room fell silent. Guests exchanged horrified glances as they pieced together the truth. Vanessa wasn't the innocent woman she claimed to be. She was a master manipulator who had targeted Richard precisely because he was vulnerable. A wealthy man on the verge of divorce, ripe for exploitation. Her plan had been flawless until Sarah intervened. Richard, standing nearby, looked as though the ground had been ripped out from under him. His face flushed red with shame and anger as he listened to Vanessa admit how she planned to drain his accounts and disappear within months. "How could you do this to me?" he choked out, betrayal etched into every line of his face. Vanessa didn't answer. She was too busy pleading with the detectives, tears streaming down her cheeks. Moments later, she was led away in handcuffs, her glamorous entrance reduced to a humiliating exit. As the crowd dispersed, some guests muttering apologies to Sarah, Richard sank into a chair, his head in his hands. He felt foolish, humiliated, and completely blindsided. All those late nights planning their future, all the money he'd lavished on her, it had all been a lie. And worse, he realized now that Sarah must have known something was wrong. Why else would she have attended the wedding with such eerie calmness? Sarah wheeled herself over to him, holding out a tissue. "Here," she said softly, her voice devoid of malice. Richard took it without looking up, still grappling with the magnitude of his mistake. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked hoarsely. Sarah sighed, meeting his gaze with steady eyes. "Would you have believed me?" she countered gently. Richard opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again, knowing she was right. In his arrogance, he wouldn't have listened. As the lights dimmed and the staff began cleaning up the remnants of the disastrous evening, Sarah lingered for a moment longer. Watching Richard sit there, defeated and broken, she felt a pang of pity, but also relief. Justice had been served, not through revenge, but through truth. Karma, she thought, always finds its way. And tonight, it had delivered its verdict loud and clear. In the weeks following the disastrous wedding, Richard's life unraveled faster than anyone could have predicted. The scandal made headlines, with journalists painting him as both a victim and a fool. Friends and acquaintances distanced themselves, embarrassed by association or unwilling to deal with his growing bitterness. His finances, already strained by Vanessa's extravagant spending, took a nosedive when it was revealed that she had siphoned off a significant portion of his savings before her arrest. Overnight, Richard went from being the successful businessman to someone struggling to keep his head above water. Sarah, on the other hand, moved forward with quiet determination. She didn't gloat or revel in Richard's downfall. Instead, she focused on rebuilding her own life. Yet, despite everything he'd done, she couldn't ignore the flicker of empathy she felt for him. Richard wasn't just suffering financially. He was emotionally shattered, grappling with feelings of betrayal, guilt, and regret. One afternoon, while attending a support group for individuals adjusting to life after trauma, Sarah realized something important. Richard needed help, not judgment. She reached out cautiously at first, sending him an email inviting him to join one of her therapy sessions. "I know you're going through a tough time," she wrote, "and I want you to know there's no shame in asking for help. These sessions have been incredibly healing for me." To her surprise, Richard responded, not with anger or defensiveness, but with a raw honesty that caught her off guard. "I don't know how to fix this," he admitted. "Everything I thought I knew about myself, my life, it's all fallen apart." Their first session together was awkward but cathartic. Richard opened up about his guilt over abandoning Sarah during her darkest days, admitting that he had resented her accident because it forced him to confront his own fears of imperfection and vulnerability. He confessed that Vanessa's charm had blinded him, making him believe he deserved a second chance at happiness, even if it meant hurting the person who had once meant the world to him. Sarah listened without interrupting, offering understanding rather than condemnation. Over time, these sessions became a turning point for both of them. For Richard, they were a lifeline, helping him confront the choices that had led him astray and teaching him the value of accountability. He began attending financial counseling to rebuild his depleted assets and started volunteering at community centers to regain a sense of purpose. Slowly but surely, he transformed from the arrogant man Sarah had once known into someone humbler and more self-aware. For Sarah, the process allowed her to find closure. Forgiveness didn't come easily, it never does, but she discovered that letting go of bitterness freed her in ways she hadn't anticipated. She stopped seeing Richard as the villain of her story and started viewing him as another flawed human being trying to navigate life's complexities. Their shared history, though painful, became a bridge rather than a barrier. As months passed, their relationship evolved into an unlikely friendship. They weren't the couple they used to be, nor did either of them want to return to that chapter of their lives. But they found solace in supporting each other's growth. Richard often accompanied Sarah to advocacy events where she spoke passionately about disability rights, inspired by her resilience. In return, Sarah encouraged him to pursue new hobbies and reconnect with old friends who genuinely cared about him. Looking back, Sarah realized that the divorce, and everything that followed, had been a catalyst for change. It forced her to confront her own strength and independence, proving to herself that she was capable of thriving even in the face of adversity. For Richard, it was a wake-up call, reminding him that love isn't about possession or control, but about mutual respect and compassion. Though their paths would likely diverge again in the future, Sarah cherished the lessons they had learned together. Life, she thought, has a way of testing people, but it also offers opportunities for redemption. And sometimes, the hardest endings lead to the most meaningful beginnings. Years passed, and Sarah's life transformed in ways she never imagined. The woman who had once felt trapped by her circumstances discovered a newfound sense of purpose and joy. Her advocacy work for disabled individuals gained momentum, earning her recognition not just locally but nationally. She became a voice for those who often went unheard, speaking at conferences and writing articles that inspired countless others facing similar challenges. Her resilience turned her into a beacon of hope, a living testament to the power of inner strength and determination. One day, while attending a charity gala, Sarah met Daniel, a kind-hearted man whose warmth reminded her of the love she thought she'd lost forever. Unlike Richard, Daniel saw Sarah not as someone defined by her disability, but as a vibrant, intelligent woman with dreams and passions. Their connection grew slowly but steadily, built on mutual respect and shared values. When Daniel proposed 2 years later, it wasn't with grand gestures or flashy displays. It was simple, heartfelt, and genuine. Sarah said yes, knowing this time she was choosing a partner who truly understood and cherished her for who she was. Richard, meanwhile, continued on his path of redemption. Though his financial recovery was slow, he found fulfillment in mentoring others who had made mistakes similar to his own. He began hosting workshops for men struggling with toxic relationships, teaching them how to rebuild trust and take responsibility for their actions. His talks were raw and honest, filled with lessons learned the hard way. Many attendees thanked him for his vulnerability, saying his story gave them hope for change. Though Sarah and Richard rarely crossed paths, they maintained a quiet friendship rooted in mutual growth. Occasionally, Sarah would send him updates about her life, a photo from her wedding, a link to one of her speeches, or simply a note wishing him well. In return, Richard expressed gratitude for her role in helping him turn his life around. "If it weren't for you," he once wrote, "I might still be stuck in my own mess, unwilling to face the truth." The story came full circle when Sarah delivered a keynote speech at a major event celebrating resilience and second chances. Standing on stage, her wheelchair adorned with flowers gifted by Daniel, she reflected on her journey. "Life has a way of testing us," she began, her voice steady and warm. "It throws obstacles in our path, breaks our hearts, and forces us to confront truths we'd rather ignore. But here's the thing. Even in our darkest moments, we have a choice. We can let pain define us, or we can use it to redefine ourselves." She paused, scanning the audience before continuing. "For years, I believed my accident marked the end of my happiness. What I didn't realize then was that it was actually the beginning of something greater, an opportunity to discover my strength, embrace my independence, and build a life richer than anything I could have imagined." Her words resonated deeply, earning a standing ovation from the crowd. As she left the stage, Daniel greeted her with open arms, pulling her close in a loving hug. Later that evening, Sarah received a text from Richard. "Your speech today reminded me why I'll always admire you. Thank you for being part of my journey, and for showing me that forgiveness is possible." Sarah smiled, tucking her phone away. Life hadn't turned out the way she planned all those years ago, but in many ways, it was better. Through heartbreak and hardship, she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more alive than ever. And though the road had been long, she knew every step had been worth it. Sometimes, endings aren't really endings. They're just new beginnings waiting to unfold.